When I went to my hospital rotation in my nursing school, my hijab was a problem. And at many times I've been told to take it off.
I've spoken to many different individuals who have went through Islamophobia, who think of themselves as lesser, that they deserved it, that they did something wrong, that the injustice that they faced was actually their fault.
There was an identity crisis that many of the youth faced, not knowing how to attribute or how to invite Islam into their lives and practice it freely.
As people, we need to make sure that the media companies that we're choosing to listen to actually shares balanced information.
Islam is synonymous with social justice. There is no such thing as being a Muslim without fighting for the rights of other Muslims as well as the right of humanity at large.
I was the only student who wore hijab in my class. And that's the thing with Islamophobia, is that it's very different. So one of the main theories that I looked at in my master's degree was critical race theory, right? So it's very much based on skin color and racism. Upon studying Islamophobia, it really became apparent that it's a form of racism, but it's not always based in skin color. Like, for example, for myself, I'm very like what you would call white passing. So if I don't wear my hijab, I'm just like everybody else, like maybe just a normal Canadian or whatever that means. But other people can't do that. You know, they can't just take their skin color or their accent and they can't just shed it for a day and just blend in with everyone else. You know, like in my research, I talk about how Muslim women are seen as being less educated, less intelligent than other women, because a lot of people assume that a lot of us are not allowed to go to school, or we weren't allowed to be educated, or that we're, you know, extremely oppressed and people tell us what to do every moment of our lives.
What does Islamophobia actually look like? What are the experiences? Having people speak about their experiences, right? I myself actually have a teaching degree. I've done practicums in the school system within Alberta. And I remember speaking to some of the Muslim teachers, and they would be very hesitant to share their faith or hesitant to share anything about their faith just because they feared backlash, right? So if we're looking at an inclusive Canada and an inclusive education system, we are already setting up a barrier if teachers don't feel that they can be comfortable in their identities. Had very personal experiences with Islamophobia. I think I was fortunate that it didn't result in something dangerous. It didn't result in death. We've seen the London family, generations wiped out as a result of Islamophobia. We've seen the mosque in Quebec, where the horrific murder of innocent people has occurred, right? So when I speak to my experience with Islamophobia, I think I'm actually very fortunate to not have had to go through such a dangerous or fatal experience. But definitely, I remember, one of my fellow classmates calling my mother a towelhead and calling her a terrorist, right? And you can imagine at a young age what kind of feelings that creates within a person, especially a young child. You think to yourself, like, why is he speaking to me and calling my mother that? When I go home, my mom welcomes me with love, welcomes me with a nice meal. She's everything far from a terrorist, everything far from the depictions you make. And yet you don't know her and you're making these assumptions and you're saying these terms to describe her. It almost created a you versus me, right? Where at a point we could have been friends. But you had to say this. And now it's like my identity, my definition of what a Canadian is, my definition of everything has changed now. I could never be associated with you because of what you've done. It almost destroyed the ability to come together.
I was a youth actually when 9/11 occurred, and I remember being a high school student in a Christian school, Christian private school, and there were only 2 Muslims in that school. And on the day when the events took place, there were some students who immediately targeted myself and my classmate, and began to throw names, calling us terrorists and things of that nature. Now, looking back, I understand we were just young kids who were ignorant, taking in the news. We weren't really able to digest it accordingly, but it did affect us. It impacted the way we viewed ourselves, the way we viewed our religion. We're here in the downtown masjid. At times you will find the masjid outside being vandalized.
There's two, I guess, reactions that I get. Either I know she's like the token here, like we get our DEI, check, she's here. Our representation of diversity is here. We only have to hire one person because she hits all of those bullets. And then the other thing is that the shock when I do actually contribute to what's being discussed, because they have this notion and this idea that because you're a Muslim woman, you don't know.
I learned there was a time a dog was attacking a woman. And a Muslim brother with a beard rescued the woman from the attacking dog. So eventually, he fought the dog to rescue the woman. The dog died. The media, from what I heard, the first narrative was that a man saved a woman from a dog who wanted to kill her. But when they realized that the man was a Muslim, the headline changed the following day: a Muslim killed a dog. So the same event, different headlines.
There's so much you can learn from everyone around you, but to be able to take things with like humility and the intention to learn about something that you're not familiar with, I think that needs to be a lot more apparent in how we go forward in conversations, whether that's in schools or in your workplaces or even your friends.
I remember a student who would wear hijab, and she spoke about how in middle school she had to be the best student. She had to be the funniest student. She had to be the person who could not get things wrong. Why? Because she was wearing hijab. So it's already that as a person who wears hijab, you have to be the best of standards because everything's against you already.
So when I was in nursing school, I was a mother of two, and I had a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old at home. So I was technically still on mat leave from my other job when I got into nursing school, but I really wanted to be a nurse. So, I made that sacrifice to go back to school. But there was a lot going on at home. I was really busy. I didn't have time to really think too deeply about, this and that. I was just trying to graduate. So there's been a lot of things that I faced in terms of my hijab. And I think one of the main lessons that I learned was that nursing and my hijab cannot go together. That wherever I went, it was a problem. It was a problem in the hospital. It was a problem in the community until I actually started working at a really supportive and amazing workplace where I felt supported by the managers, the staff, and they actually encouraged me to fully embrace who I am. But until that point, I always thought that, I can't wear my hijab if I want to be a nurse. I have been told to remove my hijab to fit in better. I have felt that I needed to remove it. So there have been times where I went to certain places and I removed it when I arrived, and then I put it back on when I left. And that's unfortunate that I had to do that as a woman living in this country, that I felt that that was the only way that I would be able to survive in my profession. But I love being a nurse. Some people say, well, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you fight for that? Well, I didn't have time, okay? I had a baby and, a young child at home. I had a lot going on. It was a very busy life. I did not have time. And that doesn't make me a terrible person or a terrible human being. Are not in a position of power. They're very vulnerable. And I think that's what we need to understand, is that vulnerability piece is so important. And by speaking up, sometimes it can make things worse. And that doesn't mean that you're a coward or that you don't stand up for it, but it's not always possible.
But some people don't have the privilege of having Muslims around them or people who are willing to accept them, right? For me, although that person did say the things that they did, I had other friends that I could, lean back on and be with. some people might not have that support. One of the biggest barriers to speaking up is the consequences that come with speaking up, right? We've seen, through my work at least, people who have spoken up have lost their jobs. People who have spoken up have had to drop out of certain programs, professional programs at universities. Whole classrooms at the university have been ridiculed as a result of speaking up against Islamophobia at the institutional level. When we look at the leadership at some of these universities or schools, some of them will not even give you the opportunity to speak while giving the other party more chances. So what we see is that there are a lot of barriers, right? First and foremost, you look different, you speak different. And then beyond that, the consequences that come with speaking up against a force that is, layered in between every single system that surrounds us.
We consider Canada to be a liberal society, but the problem with the idea of liberalism, it doesn't engage critically with another worldview that doesn't align with theirs. Post 9/11, we actually saw an increase in the amount of people from the Muslim community that are willing to be politicians in Canada, whether that's MLA, whether that's city councillor, whether that's applying to be a mayor, whether that's being a member of parliament. And that happened post 9/11 because they saw a need for people like us to be there to represent our voice. There are issues with that in terms of whether their voice are being heard or not, but that's one way in which people have chosen to fight that. Another way is that some people have chosen to actually completely isolate themselves, and they don't actually engage politically at all because they don't see the value in them voting because they're like, none of these people on the ballot actually represent any of my values.
I have called 311 before when my daughter was being picked on by a bus driver. I don't know if it was linked to her religious identity because she wore the hijab. I don't know if it was linked to her, the way she looked. But this driver was just asking her the same question over and over again. And I called 311. I was distressed. And the person was kind, very kind, but was like, yeah, just give them your phone number and write it for her and just give it to her. That anytime this bus driver tells her or asks her any question, she should just show your phone number. And I'm like, no, I don't even have to do that, And I felt like I wanted to be able to report, but even with my level of knowledge or work in the community, I myself don't even know where else to report that except for calling 311. And this person just treated it like, oh, it's nothing, just do this and that will be the end of it. And I remember mentioning it among my colleagues, and my colleagues were like, yeah, it's because you have the time to call. There are some parents that don't even have the time. They don't even know how to speak English to be able to even address that at all.
I think one of the things that I talk about in my research is creating focus groups for students. So maybe students who are experiencing Islamophobia, allowing them to come together and talk about what's going on, because some of the nurses in my research talk about how they sought out support from other nurses. Because sometimes we don't know, what happened to me, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't even know the term Islamophobia existed until many years later. I didn't understand what was going on. I was basically made to feel like if you just took your hijab off, your life and my life would be so much simpler.
When we've tried to understand any society sincerely, we've been able to move forward. I mean, when we look at indigenous populations, and there are so many gaps in our understanding, so many things that we have not been able to do justice to. But as we try to seek more understanding of indigenous populations, we can come to understand their challenges, come to see how we can advocate for their strength and for the justice and to help these communities. And the same can be said about any minority group or any other population that is struggling. Learning and understanding is key. And that has to be done with sincerity. We can't just do it as a label or as a certificate, right? There has to be a sincere concern. When a Muslim person needs to go for Jummah on a Friday, during the workday, what does that look like? How can we accommodate that? ensuring that there are no barriers put in place. I've spoken to so many Muslims who have said, I just don't want to even ask my employer. Like, how do you even have that conversation? It's not an easy conversation to be had, right? Not everyone knows about Jummah. Not everyone knows what a Friday prayer means. Employees should also be vocal in creating an understanding of what are their needs. What kind of things do they need to do? Do they need to step away and pray for 5 minutes each day? It's affecting me. It's affecting my mother. It's affecting my brothers and my sister. It's affecting the most vulnerable people. It might affect my children.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to be proud of who you are. And to be proud of who you are is to know who you are. Therefore, the first piece of advice I would give is continue to learn your faith. So Islamic education became a primary goal and objective within our institute. It was something that was at the forefront. Ignorance is a disease, and its only cure is knowledge, and therefore knowledge needed to be at the forefront. And this was done through being conscious of the subject matter in which we presented to the congregation during Friday prayers and the Friday sermon, weekend lectures, workshops, so on and so forth, especially interfaith and outreach. It was important that we didn't only educate our own community, but it was important that we went out and taught our neighbors, taught our external community as well. Knowledge is absolutely everything. The knowledge is the prerequisite of statements and actions. A Muslim cannot speak on Islam. A Muslim cannot practice Islam unless they have the prerequisite of knowledge. Knowledge is the key, and that knowledge begins with our faith in the Quran as God's word and the example of our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him.
There is no normal, and we cannot live in normal if normal is built on injustice. We need to redefine what does normal look like? What are the systems in place that addresses these issues once they arrive? Because right now it's Islamophobia. Tomorrow it's going to be something else, right?
Because of the hijab, we're very, very identifiable. So we're identifiable as Muslims wherever we go. Whereas a lot of Muslim men can just blend into society. A lot of them have a beard or don't have a beard, but they can choose to display their faith if they want to. They can choose to tell somebody that they're Muslim if they want to.
I mean, when we look at Western media, what we find is the common token of a Muslim woman who wears hijab, and then her hijab miraculously comes off after a few episodes, or she falls in love with, one of the Western individuals, and she doesn't wear hijab anymore, right? So it's a narrative showing that, hijab is something that is unwanted, something that is, something to move on from. You need to progress away from it, right? And this is not only the case for Western media, but looking at media all across the world. I'm from a Pakistani background. Even though a majority of the population are Muslim, in media, you don't see a lot of the time women wearing hijab. You don't see that portrayed as a positive thing.
I realized that the discrimination that, for example, Black Muslim nurses are facing is very, very different than anything I've ever experienced. So for me, I wear a hijab, but a lot of people don't, they can't quite place my identity, or they think I might be a convert. I've had that question quite often. I don't have an accent. So I get these questions sometimes.
I think it's about choosing your battles in specific instances, and sometimes you just choose to let go. When you see the microaggressions that are occurring, you have to ask yourself, do I have the current energy to deal with this, or shall we just deal with the agenda of the meeting? Do I have the time to talk to someone who's lived their life in privilege and doesn't understand what it means to have a barrier, doesn't understand the fact that I have to have 3 times, 4 times, even sometimes 5 times the credentials that they have? And we sit across the table, and yet my voice is still seen as less than what they have to add to the table, with no lived experience from their end either. So,
particularly after 9/11, we found 2 extremes. We found individuals who viewed their religion as a means of identity and a means of not seeking any type of compromise, and therefore that led to a form of extremism in the way they dealt with the external community. Where on the other hand, there was another form of extremism where people completely forsake their religion and moved away from their religion, fear of the possible repercussions from community members, neighbors, coworkers, so on and so forth. And this was very difficult because, as you know, Islam is that religion of moderation. The curriculum will remain as is. The questions are what changed. And how we deal with those questions did need to take place in light of the circumstance and the situation that the Muslim community was going through. Our faith stands on strong tradition, our Quran and our prophetic tradition. The way we propagate it, the way we teach it, and the way we share it certainly had to have been presented in a very unique and wise way.
One of the key experiences that I had was going to Parliament, right, and getting community leaders from my own community to speak up about the issues that Muslims were facing within their community. Policies would be put in place to safeguard Muslims against these negative experiences and negative, rhetoric that was around them. If we were to take all of the Muslims out of society, those that wear hijab, those that don't, those that practice the faith to the best of their ability, those that might not, what would be the result? Would we still have the businesses that we see helping our societies? Would we still have the education that we would want for our children? Would we still see the establishment of institutions and systems that provide our society with positive growth?
I truly believe that Islam and being a Canadian share fundamental values, and our faith teaches us to be the best version of ourselves, not only to ourselves, but to others as well. And if we as Muslims can adhere to our teachings and our beliefs and our values, then naturally that will align with our community here in Canada.
Right? These issues are consistent and they must be spoken about consistently. But what we must have is to have foresight, right? To understand that these type of things can happen.
Expertise of having the lived experience can never be taken away by someone sitting in a lab looking at numbers and statistics. You become the expert of the issue when you have a lived experience.
I'm not fighting for the world. I'm fighting for myself. I'm fighting for my mother, my family members, my friends. And when I had that personal connection, it made it much more easier to go day by day to fight against this force of Islamophobia.
But how come in our minds and in our head, when we think of a Canadian, we don't think of a Muslim person. We don't think of someone who is speaking a different language other than English or French. We don't think of someone who maybe got their PhD in another country.
I wanted to complete this documentary because at this point in my life, I would like to explore the different intricacies of society, see why it functions the way it does, who functions within it, and how I can be the best and most effective citizen. Broadcasting companies and platforms, they have a certain perspective that they want to portray. It is the responsibility of the people to make sure that these ideas align with them and they discern the information that they are absorbing so that they aren't being hateful towards a certain group based on unfounded information. If you are at home and you feel uncomfortable with the information in this documentary, I'd ask that you sit with yourself and see why you feel that way. Oftentimes when we're uncomfortable with something, it's because we need to do further research into it.
There's other people out there who are having to die because of their faith and because of their identities, because of their land. We just need to speak up. That's our responsibility.